The sun was setting over the dusty plains of Montana Territory in the autumn of 1878 when Sarah Mackenzie spotted the figure sprawled beside the creek. She had been riding fence for 3 days straight, checking the sparse cattle that remained on her family's struggling homestead, when something caught her eye near the cottonwoods that lined Silver Creek. At first, she thought it might be a fallen tree branch, but as her horse Thunder drew closer, she realized with a start that it was a man. Sarah quickly dismounted and rushed to the stranger's side. He was elderly, perhaps in his 70s, with silver hair matted with dried blood, and clothes torn from what appeared to be a nasty fall. His breathing was shallow but steady, and she could see a deep gash on his forehead that had stopped bleeding but looked serious. The man's horse was nowhere to be seen, likely spooked and run off after whatever accident had befallen its rider. Without hesitation, Sarah knelt beside the unconscious man and gently shook his shoulder. "Mister, can you hear me?" She called out, but received no response. She knew she had to act quickly. The temperature was dropping as evening approached, and leaving an injured man exposed to the elements could mean his death. Sarah was no stranger to hardship or making tough decisions. At 23 years old, she had been running her family's small ranch practically single-handedly since her father died 2 years earlier, and her mother had fallen ill shortly after. Sarah examined the man more closely. Despite his current condition, his clothes suggested he was no common drifter. His boots were well-made leather, and though dusty and scuffed, his shirt and trousers were of good quality fabric. A gold pocket watch chain glinted from his vest, and his hands, though weathered, showed signs of a man who had known prosperity. Still, Sarah's upbringing had taught her that every human life had value, regardless of station or wealth. She managed to lift the unconscious stranger and, with considerable effort, got him onto Thunder's back. The horse, sensing the urgency of the situation, stood perfectly still as Sarah mounted behind the injured man, supporting his weight as they made their way back to the Mackenzie homestead. The ride took nearly an hour, with Sarah constantly checking to ensure the man was still breathing and hadn't slipped from the saddle. The Mackenzie ranch house was modest, a simple 2-room cabin with a small barn and corral that had seen better days. Sarah's mother, Ellen, emerged from the house as she heard Thunder's approach, immediately recognizing from her daughter's posture that something was wrong. Despite her own failing health, Ellen Mackenzie had once been known throughout the territory for her nursing skills, and she quickly took charge of the situation. Together, mother and daughter carried the stranger into the house and laid him on Sarah's bed, the only one with a decent mattress. Ellen immediately began examining his injuries, while Sarah heated water and gathered clean cloths. The head wound was serious, but not fatal, and they discovered he had also suffered what appeared to be broken ribs and a badly twisted ankle, likely from being thrown from his horse. For the next 3 days, Sarah and her mother took turns nursing the stranger back to consciousness. Ellen prepared poultices and tended his wounds with the skill of someone who had doctored both humans and animals for decades on the frontier. Sarah sat by his bedside during the long night hours, occasionally reading aloud from the few books they owned or simply talking to the unconscious man about life on the ranch, somehow believing that hearing a familiar voice might help draw him back to awareness. On the 4th morning, as Sarah was changing the bandage on his head wound, the man's eyes fluttered open. He looked around the unfamiliar room with confusion before his gaze settled on Sarah's face. His eyes were a piercing blue, and despite his age and current condition, they held an intelligence and strength that suggested this was a man accustomed to command. "Where am I?" he asked in a voice roughened by days of unconsciousness. "You're at the Mackenzie ranch," Sarah replied gently, setting down the fresh bandage. "I found you 3 days ago by Silver Creek. You'd taken quite a fall. How do you feel?" The man tried to sit up, but winced in pain and thought better of it. "Like I'd been trampled by a herd of buffalo." he admitted with a weak smile. I remember now. My horse stepped in a prairie dog hole and threw me. Must have hit my head on a rock. He looked at Sarah with genuine gratitude. You saved my life, young lady. I don't know how to thank you. No thanks necessary, Sarah replied, though she was pleased to see he was alert and coherent. My mother and I couldn't very well leave you out there. What's your name, mister? Thomas, the man replied, though he seemed to hesitate slightly before continuing. Thomas Hartwell, and you are Miss Mackenzie, I presume. Sarah Mackenzie, yes, and that's my mother Ellen. Sarah gestured toward the kitchen where Ellen was preparing broth for their patient. You just rest now, Mr. Hartwell. You're welcome to stay as long as you need to recover. Over the following weeks, Thomas Hartwell proved to be a surprisingly engaging houseguest. Despite his injuries, he insisted on helping with small tasks around the ranch as soon as he was able to move around with the aid of a walking stick Ellen had fashioned for him. He demonstrated an extensive knowledge of cattle, horses, and ranch management that seemed to go far beyond what a common traveler might possess. Sarah found herself looking forward to their evening conversations by the fireplace. Thomas was well-read and had traveled extensively throughout the West, sharing stories of boom towns and cattle drives, of fortunes made and lost, and of the changing face of the frontier. He spoke with authority about business matters and seemed particularly interested in the challenges facing small ranchers like the Mackenzies. Times are changing, Thomas observed one evening as Sarah updated him on their ongoing struggles with cattle rustlers and the pressure from larger outfits trying to buy out smaller spreads. The days of the open range are numbered. The big ranchers are consolidating and the small operators are getting squeezed out. Tell me something I don't know, Sarah replied with a bitter laugh. We've lost nearly half our herd to rustlers this year, and the bank is breathing down our necks. I'm beginning to think we might have to sell out and move to town. Thomas studied her face in the flickering firelight. This land means a lot to you, doesn't it? Everything, Sarah admitted. My father broke his back building this place. My mother gave up a comfortable life back east to follow him out here. I can't bear the thought of losing it all. What Sarah didn't know was that her guest was listening to her troubles with more than just polite interest. Thomas Hartwell was indeed well-versed in cattle and ranch management, but not as a hired hand or small operator. He was, in fact, one of the most successful ranchers in the entire Montana Territory, owner of the vast Circle H ranch that sprawled across nearly 200,000 acres 30 miles to the north. His holdings included not just cattle, but also mining interests, timber rights, and considerable investments in railroads and banks throughout the region. Thomas had been traveling alone, something his ranch foreman and business partners constantly warned him against when his accident occurred. He had been returning from a business meeting in Helena when he decided to take a shortcut across the open range, a decision that had nearly cost him his life. His failure to return had undoubtedly caused considerable concern among his employees and business associates, but Thomas found himself reluctant to reveal his identity to the Mackenzie women who had shown him such kindness. Part of his reticence came from years of experience with people who treated him differently once they learned of his wealth and influence. He had grown weary of the constant requests for favors, investments, and handouts that seemed to follow him wherever he went. But here, in this humble cabin, he was simply Thomas, a man who had been shown genuine kindness without expectation of reward. As his strength returned, Thomas began accompanying Sarah on her daily rounds of the ranch. He quickly assessed that the Mackenzie operation, while small, was well managed despite their financial difficulties. Sarah knew cattle and horses, could read weather and grass conditions, and had the kind of practical intelligence that couldn't be taught in schools. Her mother, despite her illness, had clearly passed on valuable frontier skills to her daughter. Thomas also observed the evidence of the family's struggles. The fences needed repair, the barn roof leaked, and several pieces of essential equipment were held together with wire and determination rather than proper parts. Most telling was the small size of their remaining herd. What should have been several hundred head had been reduced to fewer than 60, barely enough to sustain the ranch through another harsh winter. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table sharing a meal of venison stew and biscuits, Ellen Mackenzie suffered a severe coughing spell that left her weak and pale. Sarah quickly helped her mother to bed, and when she returned to the kitchen, Thomas could see the worry etched clearly on her face. "How long has she been ill?" Thomas asked gently. "Since right after Papa died," Sarah replied, sinking into her chair with exhaustion. "The doctor in town says it's consumption, but we can't afford the treatment he recommends. He wants her to go to a sanitarium in Colorado, somewhere with clean air and proper medical care." She laughed bitterly. "Might as well suggest she visit the moon. We barely have enough money to keep food on the table." Thomas felt a deep ache in his chest as he watched this brave young woman struggle with burdens that would have broken many people twice her age. Here was someone who had saved his life, asked for nothing in return, and yet was facing the loss of everything she held dear. He made a decision that would change both their lives forever. The next morning, Thomas announced that he felt well enough to travel and would be leaving that afternoon to return to his own affairs. Sarah felt an unexpected pang of sadness at the news, having grown accustomed to his company and the way his presence seemed to make the ranch feel less isolated and vulnerable. "Are you sure you're strong enough?" she asked with genuine concern. "Your ribs are still tender, and that ankle isn't fully healed." "I'll be fine," Thomas assured her, though he was touched by her concern. "But before I go, I want to do something to repay your kindness. I know you'll refuse any direct payment, but I wonder if you'd consider a business proposition." Sarah looked at him suspiciously. "What kind of business proposition?" "I have connections with buyers back east who are always looking for reliable sources of quality beef. If you could expand your herd and improve your grazing land, I believe I could guarantee you contracts that would make your ranch profitable again." "With what money?" Sarah asked. "You've seen our situation. We're barely hanging on as it is." Thomas pulled out a leather pouch from his saddlebags and placed it on the table. "Consider this an investment. There's enough gold here to buy breeding stock, repair your facilities, and tide you over until your first contracts come through. We'll call it a partnership." Sarah stared at the pouch in shock. Even without opening it, she could tell it contained more money than she had ever seen at one time. "Mr. Hartwell, I can't accept this. It's too much, and we hardly know each other." "Debbie, you saved my life," Thomas said simply, "and I've spent enough time here to know that you're exactly the kind of person who deserves a chance to succeed. Besides, I wouldn't offer this if I didn't think it was a sound business investment." After much discussion and considerable persuasion from Thomas, Sarah reluctantly agreed to accept what she believed was a generous loan from a grateful patient who had more resources than she had initially assumed. They spent the evening working out the details of their agreement, with Thomas providing remarkably specific information about cattle prices, shipping costs, and market demands that impressed Sarah with his business acumen. The next morning, Thomas prepared to depart, but not before giving Sarah additional surprises. He handed her a letter of credit that could be used at the bank in town, as well as detailed instructions for contacting the buyers he had mentioned. He also left behind a beautiful saddle and bridle that he claimed he no longer needed, though Sarah suspected they were worth more than her entire remaining herd. "How will I contact you to report on our progress?" Sarah asked, as Thomas prepared to mount the horse that had arrived that morning, sent by what he claimed were associates who had been searching for him. "Don't worry about that," Thomas replied with a mysterious smile. "I have a feeling I'll be hearing about your success soon enough." After Thomas departed, Sarah lost no time in putting his resources to work. The letter of credit proved to be valid for an astonishing amount of money, far more than what she had expected from their verbal agreement. With careful planning and considerable hard work, she was able to purchase quality breeding stock, hire temporary help for the most urgent repairs, and even arrange for her mother to receive medical treatment in town. Word of the Mackenzie Ranch's sudden turnaround spread quickly through the territory. Sarah's business expanded rapidly as the Eastern contracts Thomas had promised materialized exactly as he had predicted. Within 6 months, the ranch was not only solvent, but profitable, and Ellen's health had improved dramatically with proper medical care. It wasn't until nearly a year later that Sarah learned the true identity of the man she had helped. She was in town conducting business at the bank when she overheard a conversation between two men discussing the legendary generosity of Thomas Hartwell, owner of the Circle H Ranch and one of the wealthiest men in Montana Territory. "They say old Hartwell has been quietly helping small ranchers throughout the territory," one man was saying. "Never makes a big show of it, just appears when folks are in trouble and somehow manages to turn their fortunes around." Sarah felt her knees go weak as the pieces fell into place. The man she had nursed back to health, who had shared meals at her humble table and helped with chores around her modest ranch, was Thomas Hartwell, the cattle baron, whose name was spoken with reverence throughout the West. She immediately rode out to the Circle H Ranch, a journey that took her most of the day. The sprawling complex of buildings, corrals, and pastures that seemed to stretch to the horizon left her speechless. When she finally reached the main house, a structure that could have housed a dozen families like hers, she almost lost her nerve. Thomas greeted her on the front porch, as if he had been expecting her arrival. He looked healthier and more robust than when she had last seen him, dressed in fine clothes that spoke of his true status, but his smile was the same warm expression she remembered from their evenings by her family's fireplace. "I was wondering when you'd figure it out," he said with obvious amusement. "Why didn't you tell me who you were?" Sarah demanded, though she was too overwhelmed to truly be angry. "Would it have changed how you treated me?" Thomas asked. "Would you have sat up nights reading to a wealthy rancher the way you did for an injured stranger?" Sarah had to admit that it probably would have made a difference. She might have been more formal, more cautious, certainly more aware of the disparity in their social positions. "The kindness you showed me was genuine because you saw me as just another human being in need," Thomas continued. "That's rarer than you might think in my world. Most people see dollar signs when they look at me, not just a man who fell off his horse and needed help." Over the following months, Thomas became a regular visitor to the Mackenzie Ranch, ostensibly to check on his investment, but clearly enjoying Sarah's company and Ellen's improving health. Their business partnership flourished, but more importantly, a deep friendship developed between the former patient and the woman who had saved his life. Sarah's ranch continued to prosper under Thomas's guidance and connections. She expanded her operations, hired permanent help, and became known throughout the territory as one of the most successful independent ranchers in Montana. Her mother's health stabilized, and Ellen often commented that having Thomas around had brought new life to their isolated homestead. As their friendship deepened, both Sarah and Thomas began to realize that their feelings had grown beyond simple gratitude and business partnership. Thomas admired Sarah's strength, intelligence, and the genuine warmth that had led her to help a stranger without thought of reward. Sarah saw beyond Thomas's wealth to the kind, thoughtful man who had mucked out stalls and helped with fence repairs despite his injured ribs. On a warm evening in late summer, exactly 2 years after Sarah had found Thomas unconscious by Silver Creek, he asked her to marry him. The proposal came not in the grand parlor of his mansion, but on the front porch of the Mackenzie cabin, where they had shared so many quiet conversations. "I never expected to find love at my age," Thomas admitted as they watched the sunset paint the mountains gold. "But you've shown me that the best things in life often come when we least expect them." Their wedding was a territory-wide celebration. bringing together everyone from small homesteaders to cattle barons, all united in celebrating a love story that had become legendary throughout Montana. Sarah Mackenzie, the cowgirl who had helped an injured stranger, had not only saved a man's life, but had found her own destiny in the process. The combined Mackenzie-Hartwell Ranch became one of the most successful operations in the American West. But more importantly, it became known for its fair treatment of workers and its willingness to help struggling neighbors. Thomas and Sarah established a fund to provide assistance to small ranchers facing hard times, ensuring that the kindness Sarah had shown to a stranger would continue to ripple outward for generations to come. Ellen Mackenzie lived to see her first grandchild born and to witness her daughter become one of the most respected women in the territory. She often remarked that finding Thomas that day by Silver Creek had been providence at work, bringing together two people who were meant to change each other's lives. Years later, when Sarah was asked about the secret to her remarkable success, she would simply say that sometimes the most important thing you can do is help someone when they need it most, without any thought of what you might receive in return. She never imagined that helping one injured old man would transform her from a struggling ranch hand into one of the most influential women in Montana territory. But she learned that genuine kindness has a way of returning to us in ways we never expect. The story of Sarah Mackenzie and Thomas Hartwell became part of Western legend, told around campfires and in saloons throughout the frontier. It reminded people that in a harsh land where survival often seemed to depend on looking out for yourself first, there was still room for compassion, generosity, and the kind of human decency that could change lives forever. If you enjoyed this tale from the Old West, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories of courage, kindness, and adventure from the American frontier. I'd love to hear from you in the comments below what you think would have happened if Sarah had known Thomas's true identity from the beginning, or tell us about a time when a simple act of kindness changed your own life. Your stories and engagement help keep these amazing tales of the Old West alive for future generations.